Hello there, my sleep fellows. Tonight, I invite you into the quieter corners of the wizarding world. Not into dungeons brimming with danger, nor enchanted forests filled with hidden beasts, but to a place much softer, much gentler. A place of parchment and potions, glowing lanterns, and long candle-lit corridors. Have you ever wondered what it's like to live at Hogwarts Castle, not as a student, but as a professor? What it means to call that towering, magical fortress home, not for 7 years, but for a lifetime. To walk those ancient stone hallways after the children have gone to bed, when the portraits whisper softly to one another, and the staircases stop shifting. To sip tea in your quarters while the owls coo sleepily on the ledges outside, and to hear the echo of your own footsteps as you cross the grand hall in the hush of early dawn. This is not a story of spells cast in haste or duels beneath the stars. No, this is a story of rhythm and ritual, of peaceful mornings preparing lesson plans by enchanted windows, of evenings spent tending to greenhouse roots that glow beneath moonlight, of little mysteries that flicker around the edges of daily life when you've made your home inside the heart of Hogwarts itself. Tonight, we'll follow one such professor, someone you may know, someone who long ago walked these halls as a student and found his way back not through glory, but through care. A man with a love for plants, a gentle heart, and a quiet strength. Yes, we will walk alongside Professor Neville Longbottom, and through him we'll discover what it truly means to teach at the castle. Not just subjects, but kindness, patience, and magic of the most subtle sort. So find a comfortable place, let your breath slow, and allow the magic to settle around you like a favorite blanket. And if you enjoy soft tales like this one, stories that live gently within the wizarding world, feel free to like, subscribe, and explore more sleepy journeys from Hogwarts. You're always welcome here. Now, let the lanterns glow low, let the castle exhale, and follow me into the peaceful life of a Hogwarts professor. Our story begins not in a bustling classroom or echoing corridor, but in a little round room nestled high in the side of the West Tower, small, warm, and lined with pots of softly glowing plants. This is the personal quarters of Professor Neville Longbottom, herbology master of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. The sun was just beginning to rise, its first rays gently brushing the wide windows of the room. Outside, the sky over the Black Lake turned from indigo to lavender, and the surface of the water caught the light like glass. Inside, everything was calm. A steaming cup of nettle tea sat on a side table next to a thick gardening journal filled with neat, curling handwriting. A pair of enchanted slippers shuffled gently near the fire, waiting to warm Neville's feet. Professor Longbottom had already been awake for an hour, not because he had to be, but because he loved the quiet before the castle stirred. It was his favorite part of the day, a time when the portraits were still drowsy, the ghosts floated in thoughtful silence, and the greenhouses down the hill were just beginning to hum with the promise of life. Neville himself had changed quite a bit since his school days. His hair was shorter now, with a few streaks of silver at the temples. His face, once round with nervous energy, was calm, with soft lines drawn by laughter, sunlight, and time. He still wore slightly rumpled robes and carried a satchel full of seed packets and magical root trimmers. But he moved through the halls with the quiet confidence of someone who had found his place. He greeted the castle each morning with a nod to the walls, as though acknowledging an old friend. As he walked down to breakfast in the great hall, he passed familiar faces, Professor Flitwick humming quietly as he levitated spoons back into the kitchens, Madame Hooch sipping her coffee by the window, her eyes already scanning the skies for broom trails, and Minerva McGonagall, headmistress, sharp-eyed as ever, but always with a nod of warmth for Neville. At the breakfast table, he smiled as he passed a group of fifth years debating whether Horklump spores could be used in restorative potions, a conversation he'd gladly join after a bite or two of toast. You see, Neville wasn't just a teacher of magical plants. He had become something of a quiet guardian at Hogwarts. A calm presence, as someone students trusted, even when they weren't quite sure why. He had no need for grand entrances or powerful spells. His magic came in the way he listened, the way he knelt beside a frightened first year to show them the gentle pulse of a moonflower, the way he remembered every name, every blooming schedule, and every student who had ever asked to stay after class just to talk. And so, within the ivy-covered walls of the school, Professor Neville Longbottom lived not only as a teacher, but as a quiet keeper of Hogwarts's most comforting magic, the kind that grows slowly, patiently, and lasts. The day began as most did for Neville Longbottom, gentle and unhurried. After breakfast and a few cheerful conversations with students about the previous night's dream-filled divination assignment, he walked down to Greenhouse 3. The air was still cool, the morning dew clinging to the cobbled paths and glistening on the glass panes of the greenhouses. Somewhere, a hippogriff let out a distant, sleepy snort, and the whomping willow turned slightly in its slumber. Inside the greenhouse, the scent was rich and grounding. Lavender, damp soil, old wood, and a hint of dragon dung fertilizer, a comforting bouquet to Neville, who had always found more peace among roots than among wands. He moved to his desk at the center of the room, unpacked his bag, and began arranging cuttings of fireleaf ferns, delicate plants that responded best to soft humming and careful trimming. Outside the tall glass windows, the sky was turning from pale gold to a fuller, warmer blue. As he clipped a particularly stubborn leaf, a soft chime rang through the greenhouse. It was not a bell he recognized. He paused, snipping shears mid-air, and turned toward the far corner of the room. There, beside a rarely used storage cabinet and beneath a tangle of blooming wand willows, stood a wooden cupboard he hadn't opened in years. It was old, even older than the greenhouse itself, its surface marked with carvings of vines and tiny runes that had faded nearly to invisibility. A soft light now spilled from underneath its door, flickering gently like candlelight through mist. Neville set the shears down carefully and walked over, heart neither racing nor resting, just curious, the way one feels when something forgotten suddenly stirs. He reached for the handle and opened the door. Inside, instead of the dusty tools he expected, there was a corridor. A corridor. His breath caught, not from fear, but awe. The space was narrow, warmly lit, and entirely unfamiliar. The walls were made not of stone or glass, but of polished wood, lined with tiny alcoves containing bottles, scrolls, and softly glowing moss. The air smelled of thyme and parchment. A low, harmonic hum vibrated gently beneath the soles of his boots. Neville looked behind him. The greenhouse was still there, sun-dappled and quiet. Then he turned back to the passage. The door remained open, inviting but not urgent. He stepped through. As his foot crossed the threshold, the greenhouse faded, not disappeared, but softened, as if wrapped in fog. The corridor welcomed him with stillness. He walked slowly, running his fingers along the polished wood. There was no sign of who had built this place, no obvious magic humming through the air, but everything about it felt safe, familiar even, like something Hogwarts had always meant to show him. At the end of the passage, it opened into a small, circular room. There were no windows, no doors, just a domed ceiling covered in ancient vines and a round wooden table in the center, lit by floating lanterns made of soft crystal. On the table sat a single object, a terracotta pot. Neville approached slowly, his eyes drawn to the plant growing from its center. It was unlike any he had seen before, small, silver-leafed, with a spiral stem that glowed faintly at the edges. The soil around it shimmered, not magically, but almost emotionally. There was something comforting about it, something deeply familiar and yet completely new. As he leaned in closer, he noticed a slip of parchment beneath the pot. He slid it free and unfolded it. The writing was delicate, curved, and clearly ancient, but the ink had not faded. The message was brief. What grows in silence remembers everything. Neville read the words again, then a third time, and as he stood in the stillness, the plant trembled slightly, not in fear, not from any draft. It was responding to something, to him. He reached out gently and brushed one fingertip along its silvery leaf. Immediately, the walls of the chamber shifted, not physically, but visually. Soft images began to bloom across the surface of the wood, moving, like memories recalled in a pensieve. He saw students past and present, greenhouses in their earliest days, and professors long gone, tending seedlings with tender care. He even saw himself, much younger, arms full of puffapods, tripping over a broken planter, laughter echoing from somewhere off frame. He chuckled softly, but the vision that held his gaze was not of people. It was of the plant itself. He watched as a younger version of Headmistress Sprout placed a small seed into this very pot years ago, whispering something to it. The image was faint, but Neville recognized the look in her eyes, gentle hope mixed with quiet magic. The memory faded, and he was back in the room. The plant still pulsed softly, as though pleased. Neville took a breath. "You're an archive," he whispered, "not of spells, but of care." And suddenly, he understood. This plant, this hidden chamber. It was part of Hogwarts' living memory. A secret corner of the castle meant not for defense or challenge, but for preservation. A garden of gratitude, a space where the magic of kindness, patience, and small acts of care were stored like seeds, waiting to bloom when someone remembered them. And it had called to him, not through fanfare or power, but through a cupboard he'd forgotten, a chime heard only in quiet. He sat down on the floor, resting his back against the warm wooden wall. He stayed there for a long while, just breathing, watching the silver plant sway softly with the rhythm of the room. And in that stillness, he felt something rare, not triumph, not responsibility, but belonging. He stayed until the lanterns dimmed gently, and then, with a quiet bow of gratitude, he stepped back through the corridor. The wooden door closed behind him with the softest click. Back in the greenhouse, the fireleaf ferns still swayed gently in their pots. The sun had risen a little higher, and the students would be arriving soon. Neville looked over his shoulder at the cabinet. Its glow had faded. But he smiled. The magic hadn't gone. It had simply returned to rest, waiting, as always, for the next quiet soul to listen. And perhaps tomorrow, he would teach his third years not just about plant anatomy, but about patience, about listening, about how even the smallest roots can carry the oldest memories. And deep within the castle, behind enchanted walls and forgotten doors, the plant that remembered everything continued to grow. Second magical event or twist, 1,500 words. The days that followed passed gently, as days often do at Hogwarts when autumn begins to quietly settle in. The castle turned a golden hue, the wind whistled softly through the corridors, and the ivy that crawled across the greenhouses began to blush with hints of amber and rust. Neville kept the memory of the hidden corridor close to his chest. He hadn't spoken a word of the silver-leafed plant or the glowing messages etched in magic. It felt like something meant to be experienced, not explained. The kind of magic that grows best in silence. Yet, as October deepened, the castle began offering Neville another kind of whisper, one he hadn't expected. It started with a sound, not loud, not jarring, just there, a low, rhythmic tapping. At first, he thought it was the rain, then perhaps a pixie or Peeves misbehaving again, but the sound never came from the same place twice. One day it would echo softly behind the tapestry near the entrance to the dungeons. Another, it would rattle gently from the far corner of the staff library, always subtle, always just faint enough to be ignored, but persistent enough not to be. One evening, just after supper, Neville lingered in the great hall longer than usual. The students had mostly gone, save for a few stragglers playing with enchanted chessboards under floating pumpkins. The warm glow of the candles above shimmered in the golden banners of the ceiling, casting soft shadows across the rows of empty tables. He gathered a few notes and stood to leave. That's when he heard it again. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause, tap. The sound came from behind the staff table. Neville tilted his head and followed it, past the carved chairs, past the enchanted pitcher that refilled itself with pumpkin juice. He knelt beside the tall oak wall behind the headmistress's seat and placed his ear to the wood. Tap. But this time, something was different. He could feel it in his bones. The rhythm wasn't random. It was musical. He followed the pattern in his head, humming softly. It repeated in fours, with a rest between each line, like a lullaby half remembered. Neville stood slowly, scanning the wall, and then there it was, a small carving near the floor, faded to the point of near invisibility, a vine curling into a treble clef, surrounded by tiny mushrooms and curling leaves. He reached toward it, his fingers brushing the indent. Click. The wall gave a soft sigh and creaked open, revealing a narrow stairwell. Warm air drifted out, carrying with it the scent of old music parchment and wild thyme. Neville looked back once, then stepped inside. The door closed behind him. The staircase spiraled downward, deeper than he thought possible under the great hall. It curved in on itself like a shell, lit by flickering enchanted sconces shaped like musical notes. As he descended, the tapping faded, replaced by a soft, layered hum. Many voices, not in words, but in tones, woven together like a lullaby sung by the castle itself. At the base of the staircase, he found a door. Round, wooden, polished like the chamber from the greenhouse, but this one bore an emblem, a harp cradled in a moon. He opened it and stepped into a room made of sound. Not literal sound, but the echo of it, caught in walls that shimmered like the surface of water. The room was circular, lined with shelves full of sheet music, enchanted instruments floating lazily in the air, and crystals suspended from the ceiling, gently resonating with soft notes as if tuning themselves. At the center of the room, on a pedestal, rested a harp. But it was no ordinary instrument. Its frame was shaped like the branches of a tree, each string glowing softly with a different color, some bright like emeralds, others muted like old parchment. The harp emitted no noise unless touched, and yet the room seemed filled with music, not to be heard, but felt. Neville approached cautiously. His hand hovered above a string. He plucked it. A single note rang out, deep and golden. As it faded, the room responded. A section of the wall shimmered and displayed an image, blurry at first, then clear. It was a classroom, decades ago. Professor McGonagall, much younger, seated at a desk, smiling faintly as a student conjured a series of dancing quills to music, a lesson in charm work, enhanced by rhythm. Neville's brows lifted. This harp was another archive, but instead of memories stored in leaves and soil, this one captured them in song. He stepped back and looked around. Shelves bore names written in gold leaf: Aurora Sinistra, Filius Flitwick, Septima Vector. Each professor had a section filled with floating scrolls that pulsed faintly with notes, waiting to be played. He moved to a quiet alcove labeled simply Unknown. Inside, there were scrolls too faint to read, dusty and nearly silent. He selected one and placed it on the pedestal. A series of notes chimed. Suddenly, a projection shimmered before him. It showed a group of young students gathered in a forgotten corridor, one of them playing a flute. As the tune shifted into a lullaby, The stones on the wall began to glow, revealing messages etched in invisible ink, runes of welcome, reminders of kindness. Neville watched, spellbound. These weren't just lessons, they were hidden songs, soft spells carried not in wand work, but in intent. Whispers of how deeply Hogwarts preserved care in its bones. Neville sat down on the bench beside the harp. The string lights dimmed slightly, the room acknowledging his presence. He began to pluck notes gently, eyes half closed, letting his fingers drift across the strings. And as he played, he heard more than music. He felt the pulse of 100 years of students breathing in magic, not as power, but as presence. He saw flashes of moments that were never recorded in history books. A young Hagrid humming to a wounded bowtruckle, a shy Ravenclaw practicing charm patterns with her fingers in the library air, a Slytherin boy leaving a flower for a crying friend in the astronomy tower. The harp remembered what Hogwarts treasured most: small acts, quiet magic. Neville stayed until the room's glow began to dim and the harp's resonance softened into stillness. As he rose, he touched the frame of the harp gently. "Thank you," he whispered. The room shimmered in acknowledgement. And then, the song of the stairs led him back up. When he emerged again into the great hall, hours had passed. Outside the tall windows, the stars were blooming in a navy sky. A few professors had returned to finish their tea, and the floating candles hovered patiently above the long tables. Neville walked quietly to his seat. He looked once at the wall where the musical carving had been, but it was gone now, as if it had only ever appeared when needed. But in his mind, the harp still played, and he knew, just as with the plant in the greenhouse, that there were more rooms like it. Hogwarts, after all, had always been alive, and the castle had begun to trust him, enough to let him listen, enough to let him remember. A week passed quietly after Neville discovered the room of the harp, but something had changed. Not in the rhythm of his days, which remained filled with lessons and laughter, but in the spaces between things. The stillness between footsteps, the hush before dawn, the silence in an empty classroom when the last chair had been tucked in and the candles were blowing out on their own. The castle was beginning to whisper. Neville had always believed Hogwarts was sentient, alive in ways words couldn't capture. It wasn't just the moving staircases or the enchanted ceiling in the great hall. It was the way the castle seemed to breathe, how it responded to emotion, how it tucked small secrets in forgotten corners, waiting for someone quiet enough to find them. And lately, it had been offering him signs. He first noticed it on a rainy morning. The third-year Hufflepuffs had just finished their lesson on Snargaluff pruning, and Neville stayed behind in Greenhouse 2 to tidy up. The mist pressed softly against the glass, the gentle patter of rain, like music over the panes. As he swept, he noticed one of the flower pots trembling slightly, not in the wind, and not from any creature inside, just a subtle motion, like a heartbeat. He leaned in, curious, and brushed away the soil at the base. There, etched faintly into the clay, was a spiral symbol, an old herbologist's mark, used centuries ago to indicate magical flora needing protection. The pot hadn't come from his collection. It was older, much older. He turned it over and a folded note fell out, parchment aged and soft. In thin, spidery writing it read, "When roots remember, follow the breeze." He blinked, heart fluttering, not in fear, but in that gentle way it does when something forgotten calls your name. The next morning, a breeze stirred inside his quarters, not from a window, for all were closed, but from beneath his writing desk. When he peered beneath it, he found a loose floor tile. Beneath that, a slender tunnel, barely wide enough to crawl through, lined with moss and faint pulses of magical light. He considered for a moment, not going. Then he smiled softly and crouched. The tunnel was short and smelled faintly of peppermint and damp stone. It ended at a small, round door he didn't remember ever seeing before. When he touched it, it swung open with a sigh, revealing another hidden chamber. This room was different. It was not lush like the plant chamber, nor musical like the harp sanctuary. It was observant. The walls were lined with enchanted portraits, not of people, but of places, moving portraits of forgotten hallways, empty towers, even nooks Neville couldn't place. They shimmered faintly, like memories caught mid-thought. At the center of the room was a basin. Not a pensieve exactly, less silvery, more earthy. Its surface rippled like still water. Neville leaned over it and whispered, "What do you want to show me?" The water glowed, and then he saw it. Not a memory, not exactly, but a sequence of moments stitched together by the castle's magic. A first year sneaking out at night, stopping in front of a blank wall, a subtle glow, the wall parting like silk. The student peeking in, then backing away, eyes wide with wonder. A different day, a house elf walking quietly along the corridor near the library. It paused, looked behind a statue, and smiled before vanishing. And then, a memory of Professor Sprout, much younger, laughing with a group of students as they placed something behind a tapestry. A warm laugh, a soft spell, and then the tapestry shimmered faintly, sealing the moment into secrecy. Neville touched the water again, and it stilled. This wasn't about one mystery. This was about many. Hogwarts was laced with gentle enchantments woven over centuries, small acts of kindness, hidden lessons, invisible connections. The castle remembered every whisper, every song, every secret smile between friends. And it had started showing Neville these quiet things, not as puzzles to be solved, but as gifts to be received. Later that day, Neville found himself strolling through the library's oldest wing, not looking for anything in particular, just following instinct. Madame Pince gave him her usual wary look, but said nothing. The rows were nearly empty. The air was thick with dust and candle wax, and the rustle of old parchment. He turned down a row he didn't recall visiting, and there it was, an unlabeled shelf, no books, just scrolls, and in the middle, a note written in handwriting he knew well. For those who teach without asking for praise. It was in Professor Sprout's hand. He unrolled a scroll and saw notes about a student who had saved a magical beetle from being trampled. Another scroll detailed how a young Gryffindor had planted flowers in memory of a lost pet owl. Dozens of stories, small and silent, recorded and preserved. Neville blinked back the warmth in his ice eyes. The castle wasn't just full of secrets, it was full of kindness, of moments that had slipped through the cracks of larger tales but had mattered deeply to someone. That evening, he sat on the astronomy tower long after curfew, the stars bright above him, a gentle wind tugging at his robes. He took a deep breath and thought of all the corners of Hogwarts that had opened themselves to him, not because he was powerful, but because he was present. Somewhere below, the harp surely waited in silence. The silver-leafed plant likely bloomed softly in its chamber, and the basin, hidden beneath the floor, still rippled with quiet knowledge. Neville closed his eyes and listened. There were no great alarms, no grand battles, no urgent quests, just the gentle hush of a castle breathing, and he knew, with growing certainty, that Hogwarts wasn't just showing him these things for his own understanding. It was asking him to remember them, to pass them on, to remind every student, every professor, that the magic of this place didn't only live in spellbooks or great halls, but in the quiet, in the whisper between words, in the kindness unspoken, in the moment you stop and choose to listen. The gentle suspense of Hogwarts wasn't built to startle, it was built to awaken. And Neville Longbottom, once the boy who forgot passwords and tripped on his own robes, was now one of its most trusted listeners. The first soft snowfall came on a Thursday morning, so gentle it seemed to float rather than fall. Flakes landed like whispers on the greenhouse roofs, melting into droplets that traced lazy paths down the glass. The castle stirred beneath its first frost with the kind of hush that only winter brings, a hush that invites reflection, or perhaps quiet adventures. Professor Neville Longbottom found himself once again walking the corridors with no real destination, but with his heart tilted toward listening. He had begun, quite naturally, to follow his instincts through the castle, turning left when he normally turned right, choosing staircases he hadn't used in years, letting the magic nudge him gently from one hallway to the next. Hogwarts seemed to appreciate the trust. This morning, however, Neville wasn't alone. "Professor Longbottom," a soft voice called behind him. He turned to find Luna Lovegood, no longer a student, but now an occasional guest lecturer for care of magical creatures, her presence as whimsical and serene as ever. Her long, silvery blonde hair shimmered faintly in the torchlight, and her cloak bore patches of bluebells and glittering beetle wing embroidery. "Luna," he said warmly, "fancy seeing you before breakfast." She tilted her head. "I had a dream that the castle wanted to show me something, so I came early." She paused. "Are you following the music again?" Neville chuckled softly. "Not this time. I'm following a feeling." Luna smiled. "That's often where the good things are hidden." They walked together in silence for a while, passing portraits still dozing in their frames and tapestries that rippled ever so slightly as if eavesdropping. Eventually, they arrived at a small, unused classroom tucked beside the charms corridor. Neville paused. "This room wasn't open last week," he said softly. Luna reached out and pushed the door. It swung open with a gentle creak. Inside was a room neither of them remembered, its walls lined with bird cages, but not the kind used to hold creatures. These were open, decorative, each containing swirling shapes of light. Some glowed gold, others lilac or sea green. A few flickered uncertainly, as though unsure of their presence. At the center of the room was a desk, and upon it, a gently pulsing orb. Luna walked over to it without hesitation and placed her hand on its surface. "I think these are moments," she said softly. "Captured choices, someone's what-ifs." Neville watched her face. "Choices?" Luna nodded, tracing a circle around one glowing bird cage. Every time that someone made a kind decision, a small one, the castle held onto it. These are the echoes of what could have been worse, but wasn't. Neville reached for a nearby cage. Inside, a swirl of memory came into focus. A fifth-year boy putting down his wand rather than joining in on teasing a younger student. This one was smaller, its frame etched with leaves and stars. Its surface shimmered, not with reflection, but with possibility, like moonlight caught in a still pond. Neville stepped toward it, and words began to appear in curling script along the bottom of the frame. "To those who listen, we show what cannot be spoken." He exhaled slowly, stepping in front of the mirror. It didn't show his face. Instead, it showed 100 scenes, soft and overlapping, like dreams stacked gently atop one another. He saw his first lesson as a teacher, his nervous smile, the way one student had looked at him as if he might actually know something important. He had. He saw Sprout's retirement letter, the little note at the end. "You've always had the heart for it, Neville. Let the castle teach you, too." He saw students he had comforted, ones he'd listened to, small words he'd offered, forgotten to him, but remembered by them. Then he saw deeper, not his memories, but the castle's. He saw himself kneeling beside the silver-leafed plant in the hidden chamber, the way it had turned toward him, blooming not because he had watered it, but because he had believed it would. That moment had been noticed. He saw himself playing the enchanted harp, not as a performance, but as a listener. Each note he'd drawn from its strings had stirred something ancient and patient. He saw Luna smiling beside him in the cage room of kindness. How she'd helped him see that magic wasn't only in wand work or incantation, but in presence, in paying attention to what others forgot. And then the mirror shifted one last time. It showed Hogwarts itself, not in stone and towers, but in feeling. A vast heart, pulsing gently with memory, with warmth, and in its center, a single light, his. It glowed not brighter than others, not grander, but steady, rooted, trusted. Neville felt a lump rise in his throat, not from pride, but from the quiet truth of it. The castle had seen him. It had chosen him, not because he had sought greatness, but because he had made room for the smallest magics. He had listened. He stepped back, breath deep and calm. The mirror dimmed, returning to stillness. And then a voice, not spoken aloud, but felt in the bones of the walls, whispered, "You are now a keeper of the quiet magic." Neville closed his eyes and smiled. There was no ceremony, no spell to cast or title to wear, only understanding. He had become part of the living memory of the school, one of the few trusted to carry its softer truths. He left the room without closing the door. The next person would find it when they were ready. Outside, the fog had begun to lift. The sun filtered through in threads of gold, painting the castle grounds with warmth. Neville walked slowly back toward the greenhouses, where students would soon be waiting, chattering about moon seeds and pygmy puffs, ready to plant and prune and perhaps, unknowingly, make their own quiet choices. And as he reached the ivy-covered archway to Greenhouse 3, he felt the soil hum softly beneath his feet. The whisper blooms were blooming, just a little. He knelt to touch one, and in that moment, he understood the magic that changes the world doesn't shout. It listens, it remembers, and it grows. Evening settled gently over Hogwarts, wrapping the castle in its familiar hues of lavender twilight and candlelit gold. The sky outside glowed with the final strokes of sunset, and inside, the halls hushed themselves as if the very stones were sighing after a long and thoughtful day. Neville Longbottom stood in Greenhouse 3, alone now, the students having finished their lessons and left with cheeks rosy from laughter and hands dusted in soft loam. The warm scent of earth and pine lingered, as did the echo of small voices promising to water their whisper blooms first thing in the morning. He walked slowly between the planter beds, his fingertips brushing the leaves of newly planted herbs. Many were mundane, some magical, but all were loved. He paused near the outer wall where the silver-leafed whisper blooms, those enchanted flowers that responded only to kindness, were blooming in earnest now. Their soft glow lit the greenhouse like moonlight in miniature. Neville knelt beside them and smiled. These weren't just plants. They were memories, moments, proof that the gentlest things leave the deepest roots. And in that quiet space, his thoughts returned to the mirror in the hidden room, the one that had shown him not ambition or glory, but belonging. The castle hadn't just revealed its magic to him, it had trusted him with it. A keeper of the quiet magic, not a title, but a way of being. He felt no pressure from it, no burden, only peace. There were no instructions, no great tasks to perform, just the continued choice to be present, to notice, to guide others, students, friends, even fellow professors, to those same quiet truths that Hogwarts had shown him. He had already begun. Earlier that day, after his class had finished planting, a small first year had lingered behind. She looked nervous, fiddling with her scarf, unsure whether to speak. Neville had crouched down, meeting her eye. "What is it?" She'd whispered, "I think one of the plants sang to me." He hadn't laughed. He hadn't dismissed it. He'd smiled. "Sometimes," he'd said gently, "they sing when they feel safe." Her eyes had lit up like a lantern being softly lit. She'd smiled and whispered, "I think I'll come early tomorrow. Maybe it'll sing again." Neville had nodded. "I think it just might." Now, as he stood once more, he let out a long, slow breath. One of those satisfying exhales that comes when everything inside you has fallen into place without a single loud moment. The torches lining the path to the castle had just begun to flicker to life, casting gentle shadows on the frost-kissed cobblestones. Somewhere in the distance, A bell chimed the dinner hour, but Neville didn't rush. He took the longer path back, the one that passed the quiet courtyard where students sometimes studied under starlight, the one that wound past the kitchens where the smells of fresh bread and honey lingered warmly in the air, the one that let him see the castle not as a professor or even as a former student, but as someone truly home. By the time he reached his quarters, the sky was deep blue, scattered with stars. He paused at his door, looking up at the familiar stone arch above it. He whispered softly, "Thank you." And from somewhere, he couldn't say where exactly, he felt the castle answer, not with words, but with warmth. A gentle hum through the floorboards, a sense of being held. Inside, his fire was already lit. His kettle whistled softly, ready for tea. He sat down in his favorite chair, wool blanket draped over his knees, a cup of chamomile warming his hands. And as he gazed into the quiet glow of the hearth, he felt it again. That beautiful truth the mirror had shown him. You don't have to be loud to leave something lasting. You just don't have to care. And in the hush of that winter night, while the castle dreamed and the whisper blooms glowed, Neville Longbottom closed his eyes and smiled. So now, dear listener, the castle sleeps once more. The halls of Hogwarts grow still, their torches flickering low as if breathing in rhythm with the stars above. The portraits whisper their final goodnights, the staircases pause their shuffles, and even the suits of armor, once clanging with quiet complaints, have fallen silent under the weight of a calm and thoughtful night. And in one little corner of this great, enchanted place, Professor Neville Longbottom dreams, not of battles or victories, not of wild adventures or grand achievements, but of seedlings taking root in gentle soil, of laughter carried by soft winds through open windows, of kindness remembered, of choices that, though small, mattered deeply, because sometimes magic is not in the thunder of a spell, but in the stillness after. And Hogwarts, ever ancient, ever alive, knows this truth well. It is a place where children grow into themselves slowly, softly, like ivy climbing towards sunlight, where lessons come not just from books, but from the way a professor listens, or how a friend offers half a sandwich without being asked. And you too, sleep fellow, are part of that magic now. You've walked the gardens, heard the harp, followed Neville through winding halls and secret rooms where mirrors show not our faces, but our hearts. You've witnessed the castle's quiet soul, and in doing so, you've reminded it that someone still believes in gentleness. So, as your own eyes grow heavy and your thoughts begin to drift like leaves on a still lake, remember this: you are not forgotten. The world may be wide and noisy, but in hidden corners, within the walls of Hogwarts, and within your own quiet heart, there is space for peace. There is space for wonder. There is space for you. Sleep now, knowing that somewhere, under a sky scattered with stars, the whisper blooms are still glowing, and the castle, warm with memory, is keeping watch. Good night, my dear magical dreamer. Sleep deeply, sleep gently, and let the magic follow you into your dreams.